You would think that recording these would get easier. I've done so many now, but still every time I sit down to record, I have this moment of thinking, like, I don't know what to tell you. I guess I've just been thinking a lot about grief. I think about grief all the time. But I've been thinking about what it's like to be now almost 3.5 years out from Orion's death. But I've been telling myself this story now that because I'm doing better and I'm further on my grief journey, that I shouldn't need to do some of the things that I did in the beginning of my grief journey when everything was so raw and so fresh. Because there's a lot of things that I can do now that I couldn't do in the beginning, right? I'm wearing earrings today. For a long time, I never wore any jewelry. I put on a darker lipstick color because it's fall. And for almost the first year, I never bothered with any makeup. I just couldn't care. I leave my house, I go places, and I don't cry every day. Though I do always seem to cry on this podcast. But on Saturday morning, I was up early driving to take my car to get it serviced, and I saw this guy walking, pulling a wagon. Probably like a 4 or 5-year-old boy in the wagon, and he had this mass of curly hair, and he didn't look like Orion, but something about him having curly hair just triggered me, and I cried as I was driving. And then I told myself, Whitney, you need to stop crying, because you don't want to freak out, the mechanics when you get there to drop off your car. You don't want to freak out the Uber driver that's going to take you home, being all emotional. And I went home, and I had things I had to get done. I had meetings for the podcast, I had work to do. And so I didn't let myself cry then either. And it wasn't until Sunday I had gone grocery shopping, which is something I didn't used to be able to do with any kind of coherent list or plan for the week. But I had the things that I needed, and I came home and I was meal prepping. And I was by myself. And so I turned on what I call the Orion playlist. I will share the link in the notes for anybody who wants to check it out. It's on Spotify. But after Orion died, I just could not listen to the radio or popular music. I didn't care about any of the things that they were talking about in those songs. They felt so shallow and dumb. And I just wanted to listen to music that felt like I felt, that sounded like they got some of the pain that I was in. And so I made a playlist. And it surprises me actually how many songs on that playlist are from movies that were Disney or Pixar, movies that I used to watch with Orion all the time. Like Tinkerbell and the Never Beast, and Coco, and The Book of Life. It was like our experiences together were, I guess, preparing me for what was to come. It was like the grief was hidden in plain sight that whole time. When I would watch these movies with Orion that he loved and would dance and giggle and laugh to, and they were talking about loved ones leaving and being left behind. And then there are other songs on the playlist, like Eric Clapton's song that he wrote after his son died in an accident, falling out of, I think it was a 10-story window. And every time I listen to that song, I used to just think, like, don't be ridiculous. Of course he's going to know your name in heaven. But at the end of the song, when he talks about that he knows he has to stay here because it's not his time in heaven. And I just resonated with that so much then and even now. There's some other songs that make me angry when I listen to them. Like there's one talking about heaven needed another angel. And that just would infuriate me when I would listen to it. But the song would also talk about how lucky the angels were, that they didn't even realize, because they get to be with my loved one now. And then there's this song, I don't remember the name of it right now. I think it's called Bird Song. And it's this woman singing. In the opening of the song, she says something like, so that's farewell. I didn't realize I was going to have to say goodbye, that this was the end. And I cried so hard that I thought that I would die. I listen to that song on repeat all the time. And then I don't know, maybe a year after Orion died, I suddenly thought to myself, like, I want to look that song up. I wonder who she lost that she's talking about in this song. And come to find out that the song's just about a dumb bird that used to live on her windowsill, and one day she woke up and it wasn't there anymore, or something like that. I remember being so angry. Like, how dare you write such a moving song and it's just about some dumb pigeon on your stoop? A song that, like, moved me to tears and seemed so accurate in describing what my loss was like. And turns out she doesn't know anything about losing a loved one. One of the songs is, I think, called Why God, and he talks about that it's so hard. And why? Why does life have to be so hard? I used to ask myself that question so much about why did it have to be my son? There's another song, it talks about scars. I'm pretty sure the song's referring to the singer's gratefulness at knowing God and Jesus. And while I don't actually specifically resonate with that messaging, I do think a lot when I listen to that song about the way that the scars of my grief have changed me, have made me better, have forged this new kind of person that I wasn't before, that I probably never would have become were it not for the pain and the desperation to remake myself into somebody that I liked living a life that I actually enjoyed. So that's why I like that song. There's this other song called Save a Place for Me. And he's talking about saving a place in heaven for him for when he gets there to be reunited with his loved one. I really like that song too. I remember sharing it with some other grieving moms at the time, thinking that they definitely were going to get what that song was about. So I don't know, it's a playlist with all different kinds of songs that I've curated fairly quickly in the beginning. I'm not sure how many songs, maybe there's 20. But every single one of them just speaks so personally to me about how I feel, about grieving, about Orion dying, about having to still be here, about why I'm still here. That every single one of them makes me just break down and cry. And then, through the course of the song, I kind of taper off in the crying and get a handle on it, and then the next song starts and it just breaks me down all over. I don't know, as I describe it, it kind of sounds like torture. But that's what I did on Sunday. And I realized it had been a really long time since I'd let myself cry like that. Since I'd let myself have feelings of it not being fair. Maverick has started saying, that's not fair. And every time he says that, I wonder, where did he get that concept from? I don't walk around the house talking about things being fair. So he must have picked it up on a TV show or maybe at school. And it makes me wonder, where did that concept of fairness first originate? I'm pretty sure cavemen weren't walking around talking about whether or not it was fair that they had to chase down their food and hunt and gather for everything. So when did we start talking about whether or not things were fair? And even though I don't believe in fairness, I have that feeling absolutely about Orion dying. I cry and I tell the universe, much like Maverick tells me, it's not fair. It's not fair, and I don't want it. And there's something about letting myself do that just is so cathartic. It just brings so much release to let myself break down and really cry. That deep, gut-wrenching kind of crying. The scary kind that when people see you doing it are alarmed, worried about, are you going to be okay? The kind of crying where you feel it in your soul. The pain. And legitimately question whether or not you can even handle it. And even just letting myself think those irrational thoughts that it's not fair, that I want it back, that I don't want any of this. I don't care if it's my soul plan. My soul made a mistake, and I want to go back. I want to go back, and I don't care if going back means that I'd be less patient, less compassionate, less in awe of the world and everybody in it, less understanding, less aware of the synchronicities, less in tune with my higher self. Yeah, in those moments, I don't care if I had to give all that back. I'd go back to living a lackluster, less than life if it meant that I got to have Orion. And I think sometimes that it's scary to let yourself go to those places because they're dark. And it almost feels like this black, inky smoke. And then if I let it out of the box, it's going to seep out into everything. It's going to make every moment of that day, the next day, a week even, harder because I let that black pain loose. And once you open the box, you can't control how far it spreads, how deep it goes. And so it's easier to just keep it all locked up. It's definitely more efficient because when I'm sad and crying and unreasonable, I can't get anything done. But after I let myself do that, sink into those feelings, it wasn't immediate, but by the next day, after a night's rest, I felt some release from all the bottled up emotions that I hadn't even realized how much I'd been carrying around. And I realized how ironic it is that those emotions, those episodes that I used to have so frequently and used to just wish they would stop, wish that I could climb out of them and not feel that way anymore because they were scary and it was hard. And they feel like there's no hope. No hope that you're ever gonna put yourself back together again, that you're ever gonna be able to live any semblance of a life with even a tiny bit of happiness in it. And those feelings and episodes used to be so frequent, and now when I don't let myself have them anymore, they seem like a luxury. That sounds so silly to say, but now, when life is picked up, when I'm able to handle more, so I expect more from myself, it feels like a luxury to let myself stop and sink into the sadness that I'm still always carrying around. I've just gotten a lot better at compartmentalizing. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about that. I feel like I frequently hear people talk about that it gets easier. The sadness gets smaller as you grow larger around it, or it gets easier to carry. All the analogies that come up describing the way that grief changes. But I don't think I've heard anybody talk about that they miss when in the beginning they gave themselves free license to just feel what they felt and do whatever they could handle in that moment. And how hard it is as you start to integrate back into society, back into life and responsibilities, to give yourself that permission again to carve out that space and time for your sadness. So I don't know, I just thought that I would share that even now, after 3.5 years, I still have those moments. And maybe people don't talk about that if they're having it too, because they don't want to scare the people in the beginning of their grief journey. But I can say that the episodes have stayed the same, but my appreciation for them has changed. I guess now my sadness and grief is not like this unwelcome intruder in my life. I guess because now it's been here for 3.5 years. It's become a long-term house guest. And I guess because now it's not here all the time, that when I welcome it back in, I don't know, it kind of feels like a dear friend. It feels like that best friend you haven't seen in a long time. And then you get to just be your real self around them. They know you so well that there's no need to pretend to be anything but what you are, because they would see right through it. That's what my sadness feels like to me now. This complete acceptance of who I really am on the inside. All the parts that I carry around with me all the time, instead of the ones that I deem are most appropriate to present publicly, to embody daily, to focus on because they are what is most productive in getting my responsibilities and life done day to day. So I want you to know that I remember when the sadness was hard and I just wanted it to leave and I hated it. And I cursed the sadness every day. I told it to go away and to bring my son back. But someday it can grow and change to be something that you kind of love and cherish about yourself. I think especially once you've come to this place of acceptance that it's not going to go away, and your child can't come back. And if you're already further along on your grief journey and at a point where I guess you're not connecting with that sadness anymore, maybe you don't need to. Maybe there are people out there definitely who are less emotional than I am, and that doesn't make them bad people. There's nothing wrong with that. Honestly, I think some people would say there's something wrong with me, that I'm so emotional and I cry. I cry so often on this podcast, so often when I'm talking to other people about their pain and sadness. But I would still suggest you maybe check in with yourself and see if maybe you need to connect with the sadness a little bit. If maybe giving yourself an afternoon to feel all the things that I think as grievers we easily start to tell ourselves we shouldn't feel anymore because it's been so long, because we've healed so much, because we've made progress moving forward. And maybe even because we're afraid that if we let ourselves, that then we'll backslide to where we used to be. But I don't think you have to fear that. And I think embracing your sadness can be a strength for you. At least that's how it feels for me.